Hello and welcome to Archive West Texas, a program celebrating the voices and stories of those who've shaped our region. I'm your host, Gordon Wilkerson, joined today as always by our producer, Thomas Dye. We're pleased today to continue our conversation with David Weaver, longtime CEO of the South Plains Food Bank. In last week's episode, David gave us a good overview of his background and the early days of the food bank, including its formation. If you didn't have a chance to catch that episode, please find it on our website. But today, David, welcome back. We want to talk a bit about how you grew the food bank and some stories you have on your work there over 3 decades. Thanks again for joining us.
It's my pleasure to be here. It's fun to visit and remember with you.
You know, you talked a little bit last week about some of the after-school programs and the school lunch programs, but you also launched a number of programs over your tenure at the food bank, including the Grub program. I believe you built an apple orchard, did some mobile pantries. Talk us through a few of those, and I guess take us back to when you took the CEO position in 1997, what the organization looked like, and then let's talk about how you grew it, where it was when you handed off to Dina.
Well, I was very fortunate in that when I became the CEO in 1997, Carolyn had created this wonderful organization, had a great reputation around the state and around the nation. We were involved with, at the time, it was America's Second Harvest. Some of the projects that Carolyn, just had an amazing vision. I think that's what everybody who came out here said, y'all are doing what? But of course, the way we distribute food is unique among food banks because we, with some of the agencies that didn't have really facilities to store food, we said, well, if you'll screen people for us and give them a voucher, we'll come out and we'll have food boxes that are prepared for them, and we'll distribute them. So that was something that she did that was new, and we continued to grow that. The farm that we had out off of Loop 289 and the interstate, we started that because we didn't have a lot of access to fresh produce at the time. So we said, well, we can just kind of grow our own, and so we had this great farm out there. I remember Charles Cathy was really involved with that. Jerry Mears, these people said, oh yeah, I can farm. And it was great because a lot of the gentlemen who were involved with us at that time had just retired, and they were kind of in a sweet spot where they still had lots of energy and lots of vision and wanted to help us get things going.
So how big is that farm?
It's about 7 acres.
And what do you grow there?
We grow vegetables.
All right.
We grow zucchini, squash, tomatoes, potatoes. We've grown strawberries, peppers, whatever we can come up with. And along the way with the farm, just kind of as a side note, and this led eventually into the Grub program, we started having schools that wanted to come out and show their students where we grow food, because a lot of times kids go to the grocery store and they think, well, that food comes from the grocery store, but actually we grow it, grow watermelons. And we'd come out there and kids would, they'd learn and they'd get their fingers dirty. And then they started coming out and volunteering with us and, helping us pull weeds. And we tried to be chemical free. We could never be organic, I don't think. But if you're chemical free, you have lots of weeds. So there's lots of things for people to do. So we would do that and have different projects. Another thing that Carolyn started was the Breedlove Dehydration Facility, Breedlove Dehydrated Foods. Breedlove Foods is the way it's called now. But we were, after Desert Storm in the early 90s, we were given a lot of dehydrated food. And Carolyn thought, well, this is a great idea because we also would get donated potatoes from Frito-Lay's. Load would be rejected over there. They'd bring us, a floor-loaded truckload of potatoes, and we just tell people to come out. But if you get 2 or 3 of those in a short period of time, those potatoes begin to take on an odor. So we started looking at a way to preserve those, and we looked at canning and freezing, and then we received dehydrated food as a gift from the military after they didn't need it for Desert Storm. And so that was the key. So she started looking at, can we build a dehydration plant here, and had this crazy vision. And so we started that. So we had a lot of good things that were going, and a lot of challenges also. And I think, Carolyn, had this great organization. When I came in, it was kind of okay, now how do we take care of everything? How do we keep the momentum going? And, what do we do to make it a little more sustaining and have a little brighter future? How can we use these resources for, uh, just helping eliminate food insecurity here? And also, one of the things we wanted to do is give young people an opportunity to learn how to take care of themselves. It's one thing to give them food, but if we can help them develop job skills so that they don't need the food bank, so much the better. So when I came on board, with the farm, we were having a lot of youth volunteers. Jennifer Smith, who had been with us for a long time and just retired from the food bank, came out and helped us with a youth volunteer program. It was just going to be and we'd actually gotten funding from the Junior League of Lubbock called Plant a Seed to get young people out there. But we started hearing about what other communities were doing with urban farming and growing their own and combining growing with job skills. And so that's how the Grub program started evolving, because we looked at it and said, okay, we have these young people.
For our listeners that don't know, what does GRUB stand for?
Well, Grub, which I think we've changed the name, because I was always confused about that. But Lon Miller came up with that. He, one of our board members, and it's called Growing Recruits for Urban Business. But you could take it like you got grub worms, which I don't think is good, or you're grubbing in the hole, like you're working, and that's kind of the thing. But we started this plan where we would look at our volunteers that would volunteer, older high school kids that would volunteer with us during the school year, and then we started hiring those kids. We raised money. We'd sell shares in the garden, so people would have you invest just like you're investing in a stock, and your dividend is every week you get fresh produce. Now, if you have a rainstorm that hails out the whole crop, your dividend isn't too good. But when you have good growing season, you have that going. So
real life on the South Plains.
yeah, I know. You pay your money, you take your chances.
Yeah.
And there was one time when you don't think Lubbock gets flooded that much, but our whole farm was underwater. And so our shareholders were very understanding, but it gave us a chance to redesign the farm and do things the way, oh, if we had to start over again, this is how we do it. And we did it.
There you
But
go.
that's, and we gave kids during the summer their first jobs, and we did that. I don't know, we started 30 years ago. It's been fun for me to see kids that have gone through that program, and then 30 years later to see where they are. To talk about, well, I didn't really know my direction. A lot of people had written them off. Sometimes they were coming out to us to do community service. And then you see, hey, these young people are adults now. They have their own families. They're thriving. And that's kind of the dividend for me about that program. But
Absolutely.
we started that, and it continues. The food bank is trying to grow it, and kind of looking at it as feeding our future.
Yeah.
So we have that. When we started looking at the dehydration plant, JT Talkington and Mr. Sessions had a property out near the airport that they suggested that we might want to use. Back up a little bit. When Carolyn started talking about the dehydration plant,
Let's take a quick break. Let's take a quick break and dive into that as soon as we come back. I want to remind our listeners that if you have a suggestion for a future guest on Archive West Texas, please email us at info@classical1057.org. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Archive West Texas. We're continuing our conversation today with David Weaver. David, in our last segment, right before break, you mentioned, we talked about Carolyn Lanier as a visionary, and I always think of Carolyn as the irresistible force who always thought, this is a good idea and I can make it happen. And she was always successful in that endeavor. But you mentioned taking loads of potatoes and her thinking, why can't we dehydrate this? You're about to tell us the story of H.A. Sessions and J.T. Talkington and the building that became Breedlove. Let's launch there in this segment.
Okay, well, just to take it back a few steps, after Carolyn started thinking about this, she'd been talking with Bill Kingsbury and his wife, Mary Louise Kingsbury. Well, Mary Louise Breedlove Kingsbury had a piece of land, 30 acres off of what is now Martin Luther King. It was Court Avenue at the time. And when she started talking about the dehydration plant, Mary Louise thought that would be a great place to put a dehydration plant. And so the original concept for the Breedlove food was going to be named in honor of the Breedlove family. It was an old airfield during World War II, a training airfield, was to honor, that gift that Mrs. Kingsbury was giving to us. Well, as we got into it and we started raising money, and Carolyn raised, I think, about $3.5 million from various foundations to get the Breedlove plant built. H.A. Sessions and J.T. Talkington owned the old Litton Industries building on the other end of Martin Luther King out near the airport. And so they called Carolyn and said, hey, we've got this building and we'd be willing to donate it to you if you think it would work. Well, Carolyn said, well, we've already got this started, but let me look at it. And she looked at it, and it turned out that it would be perfect for what we needed. And so we did a little reconniving. We still called it the Breedlove building, but we took over the facility, I guess, in the early 1990s, and it had been used by Litton Industries, hadn't been used for a while, but it was a very solid building, as we found out, and we tried to do anything with the foundations. It's like you had to dig deep if you wanted to go under those foundations. And remodeled it. James Pipkin was involved with the board at that time, and he kind of took that on as a project, and so it became the dehydration plant, and we received, and the building really allowed us to have a little bigger vision of what we wanted to do. We put in a big static tunnel dryer, which is a long line where food goes through several stages to dry, and then we did more of a kind of a dryer, like if you're home drying, you just put it in, you stack fruit and things like that. So we had a couple of different ways to dry food. And we started drying anything that would stand still. We started getting all these potatoes from Frito-Lay. There's potato farmers there were out in the Olton area that were donating food to us. And it was great because really we were getting loads that were being rejected by
manufacturers,
processors.
Yeah.
So the guys that had the potatoes on the truck and the farmers didn't know where to go. So we started taking all this produce in. And at the time, we were getting potatoes also from southeastern Colorado. So that's how Breedlove got started. And
then ultimately, you saw the need for a new facility for the South Plains Food Bank itself. Tell us a little bit about how you transitioned from Locust Avenue to MLK.
Well, I mentioned that we had this facility on 46th and Locust, and it had grown. We'd had several expansions as we went along. After I got there, we expanded a little bit more, and it was always funny to go through the food bank because you could see each stage. We'd added a kitchen here. We added a freezer vault. We had to add offices, work areas. But my focus was, and we were seeing an increasing need for food. And so my focus was always on, I know we need to build a building, but, I need to put my resources into getting food, and I just don't have time to do a capital campaign. Well, Charles Key, who was on our board at the time, wasn't good friends with the Talkingtons, and the time Mrs. Talkington, Margaret, had surprisingly enough would come out and volunteer at the food bank through her church at First Methodist, and it was always fun when she was there because she was a good judge of character, and she would share her impressions of some of the people that were coming in. But after she passed away and Mr. Talkington had already passed away, they had the Talkington Foundation set up, and they wanted to do some good in the community, and they created a foundation that was not self-perpetuating. It was time limited. They said, we've got these resources and we want to give them away. And right now, anywhere you look in Lubbock, you can see that they had an impact on us. But anyway, Charles talked to Norton Baker, who was at the time the chair of the foundation, and kind of told him what our situation was. And so they asked us to put together a proposal. And so we figured out what we would need for a new facility. And one of the questions they asked us is, okay, if we do this, where are you going to locate it? Well, it didn't take me long to think. I've got 30 acres over on Martin Luther King, which was given to us originally for breed love. We could take about half of that and use that for our new facility. And so we did that. As we talked about it and we got our plans ready, I thought, well, I guess we're going to have to start a capital campaign because, I feel like the Talkington Foundation will give us some money, but we'll need to come up with some other donors. So we were preparing for that. And then Charles called me back and he said, well, David, I think they're pretty receptive to the idea. They just have one question, well, I go back. He said they not only were receptive, they said they'd like to fund it, but they had one question. And they said, can we have naming rights? And I said, we can be bought. And so they actually funded the whole project. So we have the Margaret and J.T. Talkington Distribution Center of the South Plains Food Bank over on 46th and I'm sorry, over on Martin Luther King and Breedlove, wherever. I'm getting all confused.
It's a beautiful facility, and it's an
It is a cool
incredibly
facility.
functional facility, and it is a testament to the Talkington division and
But
philanthropy
going
within the
back
community.
to Carolyn never wanted to waste a gift. So after we didn't build Breedlove there, we put in an apple orchard. George Elliott from Texas Tech, who'd put in Dr. Ellie had been out at Texas Tech and had put in commercial orchards. He said, well, what if we put in an orchard back there? And Howard Mercer and had been talking to him, so we did that. So we over a couple of years, we planted 2,500 trees out there. So we had the orchard, we had the food bank, all on the same property, and it's worked out nice.
Certainly has. Let's take a quick break here. Want to remind our listeners that all of our archived West Texas episodes, including this show, are available on demand in our station app and also on our website at classical1057.org. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Archive West Texas. We're wrapping up our conversation today with David Weaver, former CEO of the South Plains Food Bank. David, can't think about the food bank without thinking about volunteers. I have no idea how many people have volunteered at the food bank over the years, but speak to the importance of volunteerism at the food bank and give us one or two of your best volunteer stories.
Well, volunteers are the lifeblood of the food bank. And in a year's time, when I was tracking volunteers, all the time that volunteers would put in would equate to a staff having about 50 extra staff members. And that's probably just the people that we were tracking. You think about the volunteers at the churches and agencies that we work with, and they're tremendous. An organization like the Food Bank or Meals on Wheels or Salvation Army, none of us could operate if we didn't have volunteers. And we had some great volunteers who were so dedicated. And we had our front desk volunteers that were the face of the food bank when people would come in, and they would help people, know who to be contacting or first point of contact. They would check our vouchers as people came in to redeem food boxes. We had other volunteers in the back who came on a regular basis, and they would help us sort food or build food boxes or harvest apples. Uh, I remember one volunteer I had when we were looking for a new staff member, and he was a faithful volunteer. He was a retired teacher, and I asked him if he'd be interested in coming on board as staff, and he kind of looked at me, and he thought about it. He said, David, when I come out and volunteer, I get to come here. I choose to volunteer. If I work for you, I'd have to volunteer. So I said, I'm not interested in that. But he continued to be just like another staff member. And if he needed to go off or take a vacation, it was a lot easier than saying, okay, fill out this form for vacation time. But and I got to be great friends with volunteers. The staff, Mary Solis, who ran our back office, she would kind of get irritated at me because I always liked to walk through the warehouse and just talk to people. And she was always telling me I was wasting their time and wasting my time, that they had work to do. But it was a great way to make connections with with our volunteers. And the wonderful thing I think about volunteering is when you're out there and you see what we're doing and who we are serving, it makes a difference. And I would always tell people, well, how do you know that people you're giving food to really deserve it? Uh, and I just say, well, I don't know. Why don't you come out and volunteer with us? Why don't you volunteer at one of our agencies
Yeah.
and come face to face with those people? And then let me know what you think. And usually they didn't ask me that question again if they would do that. Uh, Volunteering, serving others, it just changes you. It gives you a whole different perspective because it gets you outside of yourself. And we had people that were doing that all the time. And so that's I miss being with those people and just hearing their stories. And of course, we'd go out and it's kind of like drinking coffee with friends. We'd start talking. We'd solve the problems of the world. Um, and another thing that I would see is a lot of times that when I was talking to volunteers, I would ask them, "Why are you volunteering?" And more often than not, I'd say, well, when I moved to Lubbock 20 years ago and I was getting started, I didn't have a job. And I would come out here and I would get food from you. Our kids who would say, or people who would say, when I was a kid, I used to come out here with my mom and we get food boxes. So it's my way of giving back.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you see that. And, that's what I love about the volunteers, and that's a story that's repeated so often. Uh, there were funny things. We had one volunteer who would sort food from us, and sometimes people will give us food, and I don't think the food bank takes food donations the way we did because of COVID, and there've just been some changes. But I was always amazed at how many cans of soup that we would get that had expired 10 years ago. You can use things a little beyond the expiration date, but maybe 10 years is pushing it. And but this particular volunteer, I think it was Skipper Woods, not that I'm naming names, but he would collect everything that was beyond like 10 or 15 years old, and he'd always bring it to my office and say, David, are we accepting this? Is this still good? No, Skipper, give it to me. So I had this whole collection of cans that Skipper had brought to me. So, but it just reminds me that our volunteers played a critical role because all the food that came in, they would look at it, they would make sure the cans were safe, that there weren't any dents, that they weren't bulging, and that they were kind of within the code for expiration dates.
There we go.
Yeah.
What do you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities in hunger relief today?
Well, I think every year at the food bank, I think there was different. It was different. I mean, there were always different challenges and different solutions. We were always paying attention to other food banks. What are they doing? At a school in Savannah, Georgia, started the Kids Cafe program. So we thought, well, this is a great idea. We'll steal that, and we started our Kids Cafe program. But I think today, it's just the changing nature of the economy. Uh, a lot of cuts to federal programs that are going to impact us either directly or indirectly. As we if you start looking at the SNAP program and you start reducing benefits for that, it's going to put more pressure on food banks to provide more food. We receive food from the Department of Agriculture through the commodity program. Um, and as that is cut, it's going to put more pressure on us to raise food or funds to purchase food. And I know that's something that Dina is confronting right now. Um, so it's always kind of a push me, pull me. This happens, and we have to respond in another way. Every year we were at the food bank, we had a budget, and part of it with the You Can Share food drive, which, believe it or not, I'm sure the food bank is preparing for right now. We'd set a goal of we want to raise 500,000 pounds of food. Well, what happens if you don't raise it? Well, we didn't meet that goal, but that doesn't mean we stop trying. So we just keep working on it. Um, and it's just, I think all the food banks are kind of struggling on how are we going to uh, overcome this. When I started at the food bank, we did not accept any kind of federal funding or any commodity programs like through the TFAP program. And it was actually the state of Texas that came to all the food banks in Texas and said, you guys have the natural distribution system that we need. And you can do it a lot cheaper than the system that they were using. So, that's how we started receiving TFAP commodities. And so it was a partnership and we've leveraged. And one of our objections initially was that, working with government, you have too much red tape and we'd rather get food out.
Yeah.
So the Texas Department of Agriculture was very generous in saying, okay, we may not be able to do away with all the red tape, but we can make it more pink than red. And so we had a great relationship. But, times have changed. And so it's just you're trying to react to the changing environment. Another impact is grocers and food manufacturers had a lot more waste 30 years ago. And that waste, it was either take it to the dump ground or give it to food banks where we would go through it, make sure it's safe, and we would distribute it. Now, food manufacturers are much more efficient, and grocery stores are working on even thinner margins. And so we still, I'm sure, pick up food from our partners, HEB, Lowe's, United there in Lubbock, but probably not as much as we had been. I'm not sure about the answer to that, but that was the trend that I was seeing.
Yeah. David, you've had a remarkable career over 3 decades in community service in Lubbock. What advice would you offer to future generations of community leaders?
I think the success that Carolyn had, and I feel like the success I had, was building up relationships and keeping your feet on the ground. And those relationships go to the foundations, the donors, your board members, your volunteers, and it also goes to the people you serve. And so just make sure you're getting out and meeting those people, hearing their stories, sharing their stories, and communicating that. I felt like a whole lot of my job at the food bank was actually going back to what I learned when I was in theater. And you direct a play, you cast the right people, you have a story you're trying to tell, something you're trying to accomplish, and then you empower them to do their jobs, and don't overmanage and don't undermanage. Step in when you need to, but you have a vision and let them carry out their interpretation of what that story is going to be. And so that's, always, trust people. There are times when you have to step in. Probably the area that I hate worse or most is just the personnel area, and that time when you do have to have conversations and say, well, this may not be working the way we want it. But that's, just go out there, be yourself. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
I do what I'm doing because I love it. I love the people, and I want to share that story.
There you go. We appreciate you taking these last 2 episodes to share your story. I want to thank you for your decades of service. Thank you for joining our program today. Our listeners appreciate everything that you've done, shaping not just a food bank, but also providing hope, dignity, and compassion for so many people across the South Plains. For Archive West Texas and Classical 105.7, I'm Gordon Wilkerson. Thanks for listening, and please join us again next week for another episode.